Welcome to Prescription for Justice. My name is Martin Donahue. Today we will discuss endangered species and ecological destruction. After an overview of these topics, my guest Danielle Moser will join me to talk specifically about wolves. Estimates of the number of species on Earth range from 8.7 million, according to a 2011 study, to 2 billion, per a 2017 analysis, to 1 trillion, according to some scientists. The vast majority of estimated species have not yet been discovered. Today, we are living through the largest mass extinction since that involving the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. While the background rate of extinction is 1 species every 10 years, estimates of the current rate of extinction range from 100 species per year to 4 species per hour. There has been a 50% decline in wild animal and marine vertebrate populations over the last 40 years. 70% of the 10,000 bird species are threatened with extinction, as are 1/4 of the 5,400 mammalian species, 1/3 of the 24,000 fish species, and 40% of the 10,000 reptile and amphibian species. 60% of the globe's 300 primate species are threatened. Wild chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have declined by 70% over the last 30 years. Out of once large populations, there are only 7,000 wild orangutans, 7,500 cheetahs, and between 30 and 50 Florida panthers remaining. Yangtze River dolphins were declared extinct in 2007, and if global warming continues unabated, diminishing sea ice will soon doom polar bears. There has been a precipitous decline in alpha predators, which is having enormous repercussions for other species and for entire ecosystems. Furthermore, biodiversity loss has led to increased numbers and types of parasites and pests. Turning from animals to plants, 1/5 of the world's plant species and almost 3/4 of flowering plants are at risk of extinction. This is important for many reasons, not the least of which is pharmacological, since more than half of the top 150 prescription drugs contain an active compound either derived from or patented after natural plant products. Examples include blood thinners aspirin and warfarin, heart drugs digoxin, captopril, and lovastatin, chemotherapeutic agents vincristine, etoposide, and carbotaxol, opioids for severe pain, L-Dopa for Parkinson's disease, immunosuppressants like cyclosporin and sirolimus, antimicrobials such as vancomycin, acyclovir, and zidovudine, and many others. Of the more than 250,000 known flowering species, less than 0.5% have been surveyed for medicinal value. Moreover, pollinators, which play a key role in 35% of global food production and are responsible for 40% of the world's micronutrient production, are in serious decline. The food production value of these pollinators, predominantly bees, is estimated at hundreds of billions of dollars each year. The main contributors to species loss are humans, a decidedly, massively ecocidal species. Causes include habitat loss due to overpopulation, farming and logging, global warming, air, water, and soil pollution, exotic species invasions, and overhunting. Let's explore these causes. Humans occupied and or used 5% of the Earth's land surface area in 1700. Today, it is 55%. Forests currently cover 30% of the Earth's land surface area. Since the mid-1940s, we have lost 50% of the world's tropical forests. Each year, 15 billion trees are cut down, or 1 acre per second. Over 5 billion new ones are planted, yet the replacements are often different and from ecologically inferior species. Furthermore, 50% of global wetlands have been destroyed, including 90% of those in the San Francisco Bay Area and 75% in Southern California. Air pollution causes 200,000 premature deaths per year in the US and almost 7 million, or 1 out of 8 deaths worldwide. Between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year. Exotic species invasions disrupt fragile ecosystems and cost $1.4 trillion globally each year, or 5% of the world's economic output. Examples include rabbits and cane toads in Australia, Pacific rats in Polynesia, and kudzu, zebra mussels, and Asian carp in the U.S. Finally, overhunting accelerates the decline of many animals. There is a $23 billion black market in endangered species, which equals the value of the smuggled arms market and is not much smaller than the global contraband drug market of $30 billion. This underworld economy involves criminal syndicates, and its profits fund terrorist and other extremist groups. Fighting poachers, especially those preying on large mammals in sub-Saharan Africa, has become an increasing priority for governments which rely on ecotourism for large portions of their gross domestic product. While the above sounds grim, we have made some progress. The Clean Air Act of 1972 and its subsequent amendments has accounted for up to 15% of overall increased life expectancy in major U.S. metropolitan areas over the last 36 years and saved $22 trillion in healthcare costs. And the Clean Water Act of 1972 has significantly improved water quality nationwide, although it has fallen far short of its goals for a large majority of America's waterways. Agriculture, industry, and urban runoff are major sources of ongoing water pollution. In 1973, Republican President Richard Nixon enthusiastically signed the Endangered Species Act, which was passed by a large majority in the House of Representatives and unanimously by the Senate. The ESA has achieved some notable success in bringing animals back from the brink of extinction, including bald eagles, whooping cranes, peregrine falcons, grizzly bears, humpback whales, and California condors. The act currently protects 2,300 plants and animals. Because of its proven success, the ESA has been used by many countries as a model for development of similar conservation legislation. Finally, the ESA is the law through which the U.S. enforces the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, a global agreement between governments to monitor, regulate, and in some cases ban international trade in threatened species, and a key tool in the fight against the illegal wildlife trade. Nevertheless, the endangered species is under assault by the Trump administration and members of Congress. My guest today is Danielle Moser. Danielle received her bachelor's degree in political science from Michigan State University and served as an environment volunteer in Tanzania with the Peace Corps. She is currently wildlife coordinator at Oregon Wild. It's a pleasure to have you here, Danielle.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell me just a little bit about wolves, almost as if I was reading a children's nature book.
Well, the story of wolves is quite a sordid one. They have been villainized for many years, and they were originally found in all of the contiguous 48 states and also in Alaska. But due to a government-sanctioned campaign to eradicate the species, in addition to many carnivores, they were nearly wiped from our country. And so at about early 1900s, you could only find wolves in Alaska and northern Minnesota and northern Michigan. So yeah, it was quite a sordid history and a lot of overhunting and, like I said, bounties on every wolf across the country supported by the government.
You're right about being vilified. I mean, just the books that I'm reading to my daughter, Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs.
Exactly.
What has happened then since the early 1900s to wolf populations?
So as you mentioned, with the introduction of the Endangered Species Act, I think you saw a transition, especially in science, to recognize the important role that all wildlife plays on the landscape, but especially those at the top of the food chain. And so there was a lot of research and understanding done about the need for biological diversity, and wolves were definitely a huge part of that. So in 1995, there was a reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, and from there they have started to disperse. And I think, the understanding of this sort of trophic cascades and how having a predator at the top of the food chain can really impact the rest of the species just was really a turning of the tide. And so now we're seeing a lot of policies and programs to support the recovery of the native keystone species across the country. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the story in Yellowstone.
Mm-hmm. So like I said, they did a reintroduction in 1995, 14 animals they brought down from Canada. And from there, we just started to see how well both the ecosystem and other wildlife responded to it. So there's actually a video called How Wolves Change Rivers. And it's about the fact that when wolves returned, the elk started to behave like elk again, because for so long they were behaving like cows. They would just stand around in the riparian areas of rivers and just eat down the grass. And so once wolves were reintroduced, they actually started to move. And as a result, trees and shrubs and aspen were able to grow, and then providing shade for the rivers, and trout started to return. So you have this cascading effect of just having the top of the food chain
Right.
back on the landscape.
Everything
is connected. Yeah.
Right.
And then from there, it didn't take much because wolves are habitat generalists. So they really, as long as there's enough prey base, they're happy to inhabit pretty much anywhere, far away from humans.
So what do they eat?
So they typically eat ungulates or hoofed animals like elk, deer, moose, and sometimes bison if they have a good and aggressive enough pack.
Well, what's their family structure?
Wolves are in this formation called packs, like a lot of other canids, and they typically in one pack you have one breeding male and one breeding female, and it's kind of this close-knit family bond, and they hunt together, and it provides protection by being in this group. And there's a lot of research being done now on sort of even more dipping into what the social structure of packs is, and how in some ways it's similar to humans, which we love to anthropomorphize things.
And they don't actively hunt humans.
They do not actively hunt humans.
Gotcha. Does anything prey on wolves?
That is actually a good question. I don't think so. Not typically. If anything, it was maybe a scavenger that has eaten a dead wolf, but not. They're at the top of the food chain.
Yeah, I suppose maybe if you dropped them into sub-Saharan Africa with some cheese.
Yeah, maybe if it was a lion.
But other than that, and the ripple effects that you talk about are very important. You're with Oregon Wild. Before we talk about the situation with wolves in Oregon, tell us a little bit about your organization, not just with respect to wolves, but everything that you do, and then we'll narrow it back down.
Yeah. So Oregon Wild is a state-based conservation organization. We're dedicated to protecting our wildlands, wildlife, and waters as an enduring legacy for all Oregonians. So we've been around since 1974. We were formerly known as the Oregon Natural Resources Council, so many people, know us as ONRC. And we were integral in help securing over 1.7 million acres of wilderness areas in the state. Additionally, securing 1,800 miles of wild and scenic rivers, of which this year is the 50th anniversary of the Wild Rivers and Scenic Rivers Act. And then, of course, advocating for the return of native carnivores like the gray wolf. So we work on a myriad of issues, but definitely in the natural resource space.
And you're focused on wolves, and particularly in Oregon. What do wolf populations look like today in Oregon?
Yeah, so I do work on a number of wildlife issues, but wolves is definitely one of the top things I focus on. So in Oregon, currently we have about 124 wolves. So that's a minimum count. Yeah. The first wolf returned in 1999. So from there, it is a positive story of a species returning to its rightful place. We, of course, would love to see many more on the landscape, but 124 was the most recent count earlier this year.
Is there adequate funding to count them? Do we have faith in that number?
It's a minimum count for sure, and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they either have had to seen the wolf on a trail cam, have it radio collared, or seen it in person and taken pictures. So it is a pretty stringent way in which they've counted the animals. And I would imagine they would say no. They definitely do not have sufficient funds. They work with what they have. And they're usually asking the legislature for every biennium that comes up for more money for their wolf program.
Where are they spread geographically through Oregon?
Mostly in Northeast Oregon and Wallowa County, and a little bit in central southern Oreton, the
So
Rogue
it's
Pack.
extraordinarily unlikely that walking through Forest Park I would encounter a wolf.
Yes, extremely unlikely. Not to mention they don't like being by humans too much anyway. Yeah.
That helps to know that.
Yeah.
A majority of the population, I understand, from our prior discussion, supports wolves.
Yeah.
And yet there's a vocal group who are opposed to any measures to increase wolf populations in Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we're still, the things we were talking about, how wolves were villainized, I mean, I think those carry through, in our culture. So wolves can be very polarizing on both ends of the spectrum. There are people who just revere them and, it's very sacred, and others who think it's, their demise for their entire community. I think the majority of people do want to live in peaceful coexistence and want to know how to do that, how to deter wolf predation on livestock and, live in harmony. But there's always a vocal minority, I would say, in this case. But a lot of times they have the megaphone. So that's why it sounds like there's less support for wolf recovery, but I think it's just who has that microphone.
How does poaching play into opposition to wolves?
Well, so that 124 wolves, from Oregon Wild's perspective, we wish we would be seeing a much larger number. I think poaching has a big role in what's happening, especially as wolves are trying to disperse into central and western Oregon. Many probably go unnoticed and unknown, but for the 2017 annual wolf report that was put out, of the 13 wolf mortalities, 12 were caused by humans, either lethal control or caused by poaching. So poaching really is a big problem. And, broadly speaking about poaching, for example, there was a study that just came out that said of all mule deer deaths, 20% are accounted toward poaching. Yeah, of all the mule deer that are dying annually, 20% can be taken off due to poaching. So it's a pretty big problem here in this state.
What happens if, say, a farmer's cow is poached by a wolf? Is that farmer compensated in any way?
Yeah, if it's confirmed by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife that it was in fact a wolf kill, they are eligible for full market compensation for that cow.
And that's paid for by tax money?
Yes.
Is there any trophy hunting of wolves?
Not in Oregon. Trophy hunting is, I think, can be a euphemism sometimes. For some, we see any hunting of wolves is a trophy.
Right.
Nobody's eating wolf meat as far as I know.
Right.
So from one perspective, I think all hunting is considered trophy hunting when it's wolves. In Idaho, they do have they have a specific hunting season or a limited number of tags for the public to kill wolves. But so far in Oregon and Washington and California, you're not allowed to hunt wolves.
Yeah, it's interesting, that concept of trophy hunting. I don't know if you watched the Jim Jeffries show. He's an Australian comedian.
Yeah.
And if you saw the episode where he was talking about the Trump kids and poaching, and in many ways, we celebrate poachers, and they take pictures and they mount antlers and things on the wall. But what Jim was saying, and I encourage viewers to look for this clip online, is if you imagine a guy just sitting in his backyard lawn chair deciding he's going to hunt wild cats in the city.
Yeah.
And he's got a friend who says, hey, I can hook you up for $100 and get a wild cat to come over here. And he's just waiting, and he just puts a bullet in that wild cat and then poses with its dead, bleeding body. We would find that person nearly as creepy as a pedophile.
Yes.
And there are laws against doing that.
Yeah.
So I think it speaks to, as many of the topics on our program, class structures and how we view all of this.
Absolutely.
How does the Department of Fish and Wildlife regulate wolf populations and help to increase wolf populations?
So Oregon has a wolf conservation and management plan, which really drives most of the decisions about what to do as it relates to wolves in the state. From where Oregon Wild sits, we think they go to lethal sometimes a little bit too quickly. For example, for 2017, there were only 11 confirmed predations of livestock, and of those, the agency issued 10 kill orders for wolves. So it feels a little bit sometimes like retribution. And but the management plan is also supposed to help focus on recovery and making sure that wolves have the adequate protections to really return to their rightful place. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It just kind of depends on each scenario. But ultimately, the agency is not technically allowed to kill wolves unless there's a pattern or chronic depredation of killing livestock.
Is a farmer allowed to go out and kill a wolf?
Only if it's caught in the act. of killing its livestock. But no,
Gotcha.
otherwise that's considered poaching.
You talked about retribution. Wolves are just being wolves.
Yeah.
If there's an afterlife, I certainly hope, based on the number of steaks I've had, that there are not cows waiting for retribution against me, not to mention various types of seafood and so on.
Right.
Is the organization adequately funded to do its job?
For the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife? I would say probably not. You know, most of their time is actually spent doing these predation investigations. So they're the ones who get the calls, and they have to go out and investigate, you know, even if it's not actually a wolf, right? And so if somebody just assumes it's a wolf, they call ODFW, and they're the ones who have to go out in the field and conduct this investigation. So they honestly spend a lot of their time doing that. And most of the time it's not a wolf, it's a cougar or a coyote or something else that killed their cow. So I would say from the standpoint of being able to do, you know, better tracking and data collection and research, and from where we sit, we would love if the agency was able to do more on promotion of non-lethal deterrence. And so I think with more funding, that would be.
And like all
focus.
environmental agencies, it's if you don't have enough bodies, especially in a large state like Oregon, it must be a pretty difficult and thankless job to be driving all over the place,
Yes.
Trying to investigate what's going on. Tell me a little bit about other successes Oregon Wild has had.
Sure. Well, gosh,
And I say successes because I know you're making progress on wolves.
Yes, we
maybe
are
I
making
should have
progress.
you mention that first, and then we'll come
Yes.
to the broader issue.
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, you know, so the last bounty collected on wolves was in 1946 in Oregon. And then as of 1999, we started to see wolves return, and really not return in earnest until about 2005. So it is a success story, and Oregon Wild has been there from the start, being an advocate for wolves and a lot of other native carnivores, as I said before. So that's something that's really important to us, to make sure that we have a biologically diverse state, and that, you know, not just that advocates like us who you expect to be there, you know, pushing for it, but also having representatives in ODFW also supporting, you know, the recovery of these native species.
Right.
Because a lot of what they do focuses on maximizing opportunities for hunting and fishing and things like that.
And other successes of your group.
Yeah. So there's a famous drinking water from where Portland gets all of our drinking water, Bull Run, and that is something we help to secure and protect and make sure remains pristine and clean for years to come. Like I said, we've helped secure over 1.7 million acres of wilderness area, and that's really a big focus for our organization, is making sure we have dedicated lands specifically for recreation and for ecological value set aside. So, you know, Mount Hood Wilderness, and many other across the state. Most recently, we've helped to make sure and beat back attempts from the Trump administration to diminish the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument down in Southern Oregon. So we've been, you know, making sure that everybody who cares about public lands and keeping them in public hands have a voice, and many other things. We're an organization who focuses a lot also on protection of old growth forests.
Yeah. I'd like to share a quote from Wallace Stegner, whose writings I admire. You talked about having all these natural lands and how important it is to us. And he said, "We simply need wild country available to us, even if we never do more than drive to its edge and look in. For it can be a means of reassuring ourselves of our sanity as creatures, a part of the geography of hope." So I'd like to make some concluding remarks now. Certainly people can go to your website. And what else would you like them to be doing?
You know, I was just thinking about this as I headed into the studio today, because tomorrow for a lot of states it's Super Tuesday, and so I would say vote. You know, I think it's really important, not just about who our governor is and who our state senators are, but that trickles down into who's appointed to the Fish and Wildlife Commission to make decisions on species conservation. So I would say vote. That matters a lot in all aspects of what we do.
So important to many things.
Yeah.
While we can discuss the economic merits of species diversity and saving threatened animals like the gray wolf, how we treat our planet's other inhabitants says something about us as individuals and a species. Preserving ecological diversity requires a fundamental change to our patterns of energy use and consumption, as well as to global socio-political organizations. How we respond to ecological threats, and how quickly we respond, since time is running out, will determine the type of world our children inhabit and how long our species survives. To put it bluntly, humans and the myriad other species with whom we co-evolve need each other. But right now, we are the only species that can save us all. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Prescription for Justice, and I want to give my thanks to Danielle Moser for taking the time out and sharing her wisdom with us. I want to remind everybody that all the episodes of this program are available on our YouTube channel. Just search Prescription for Justice YouTube. They can also be obtained through the website publichealthandsocialjustice.org or phsj.org, where you will find hundreds of open access PowerPoint slideshows, which you may feel free to use with appropriate citation and which cover numerous environmental issues as well as women's rights, health care, food safety, race, and a number of other topics. There are also many articles and links to over 1,000 organizations, including Danielle's, available on the website. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. This has been a great pleasure, and Danielle, hope to get you and others back from your organization for a future program,
That'd be great.
Maybe in a couple of years, to see how things have gone. Keep up the great work, and please don't forget to go to Danielle's website. You can even, and she did not ask me to say this, but you can even consider donating. I'm sure groups like Danielle's need all the help that they can get, and really, our world needs it too. Again, my name is Martin Donahue. This has been Prescription for Justice. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.